hashtag Sahel Peace on social media, and a member of our staff will read some of the questions received online. All right, so I am honored to introduce our panel of distinguished experts and practitioners who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience on the Sahel. Their insights will be key as we navigate these complex topics today. Ambassador Bisa Williams, good morning.
Good morning.
You are the co-founder and managing director of Williams Strategy Advisors, LLC, and a former U.S. ambassador to Niger. You led a 30-plus year career in foreign service with tours in Guinea, Panama, Mauritius, France, and the U.S. mission to the UN. As acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, you led the U.S. delegation to talks in Havana, Cuba, breaking a 7-year hiatus of high-level direct discussions. After returning from ambassador to Niger, you were named Deputy Assistant Secretary for State for African Affairs. You more recently led the Carter Center's effort as independent observer of the implementation of the peace agreement in Mali. We are glad to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Monsieur le ministre Tchéman Hubert Koulibaly, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Vous êtes un homme politique malien, président du parti Union pour le développement
you are the head of the Union for Development and Democracy, the UDD party in Mali. You have been a minister 7 times, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. You have served your country, or our country rather, in very high-level roles. You were Minister of Foreign Affairs twice. You have been Minister of Defense, Minister of State Domains and Land Affairs, and Minister of Territorial Administration. Thank you very much. That is a lot. You were also the special envoy of the OIF in Guinea. You were also head of the observation mission of the OIF in the Comoros. You are also a full-time business owner. Thank you for honoring us with your presence.
General Francis
Béanzon.
Bonjour.
Hello.
Vous êtes co-président du
You are the co-president of the Worldwide Association of Security and Defense Professionals for Preventing and Fighting Terrorism.
Vous avez servi dans les
You have served in the Defense and Security Forces of Benin, and you have held very high-level roles, particularly within the Ministry of the Interior and Public Safety, as well as the National Police Administration. You have been a commissioner for ECOWAS for Political, Peace and Security Affairs from 2018 to 2022, and formerly you were military advisor to ECOWAS in Guinea-Bissau. And during your term at ECOWAS, you have managed 14 presidential elections, 2 Senate elections, and 4 parliamentary elections, all sensitive in the region. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you.
Ambassador Williams. Rather than a proactive engagement is both outdated and ineffective. Why should the U.S. government reconsider its engagement? What makes the Sahel important for U.S. foreign policy?
Well, thank you, Kanisa, and it really is important that we have this discussion. So I will jump right into that question. For a very long time, U.S. policy in Africa has not been a priority in general. I think basically, let's even skip past 9/11 and go to 2011. With the fall of Libya, the attention turned to the Sahel for probably the wrong reasons, and that security became the priority without thinking about, well, who are the people there, what does the region have to offer? I think that the Sahel is important for the United States, not only for our national security,
parce que nous avons des préoccupations par rapport à la migration. Bon, on va tout d'abord parler du côté négatif. Les gens sont préoccupés par l'explosion démographique en Afrique. 4 personnes sur 5 sur la planète d'ici 2045 sera africaine. Et si on ne développe pas les continents, non seulement pas le Sahel, mais les continents globalement, il y aura toutes des vagues de personnes qui vont se déplacer en Europe et aux États-Unis. Les États-Unis sont préoccupés par la migration, et donc c'est un défi. Aussi les minéraux rares dont nous dépendons et dont nous dépendrons encore plus
in the Sahel region and in the African continent. So there are, again, security, but also economic reasons for the United States to be involved. But I think the primary reason is that the people of Africa, of whom I'm a descendant, let's say, have contributed so much to the world. They're building the world, all human resource and the potential. We are a whole region of people to be deprived of resources, of education, of opportunity, and of the possibility to help make this a better place. So I think that the United States needs to reprioritize and say, what are ways we can have a partnership that is really collaborative and not a partnership that is dealers. So certainly there are security reasons. I think there are important economic reasons. I think there are important alliance, nation partnership building reasons that we should be paying attention to the Sahel and that we need to readjust what our priorities are and why we have them.
Thank you. So you've emphasized the term partnership, which shows up quite a lot in the U.S. foreign policy towards Africa, the recent one. And so I will use that term partnership and that principle to ask a question to le ministre Coulibaly. Le Mali s'est retiré du G5 Sahel. Le pays a annulé ses accords de défense avec la France. Le pays a demandé le départ de la MINUSMA tout en faisant appel à des combattants de Wagner. Pensez-vous que nous sommes...
Or are we seeing a new reality? Are we seeing a new diplomatic reality for a country that wants, and I'm quoting, to regain its sovereignty? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I would like to first off say that I agree with everything that Madam Williams said, and I will come back to this question of the economic aspect, but on politics and policies, especially in terms of foreign policy, we are obliged to look at a new reality, and the political decisions that were taken on concerning cooperation partners for security, for defense in Mali, have led to a new reality. The decisions taken concerning the RECs, the local regional community, economic communities, are also part of this. All this needs to be looked at in one frame, one view. So we need to find one voice, to find a logistics that will fit the situation after the coup d'etat of 2020. So the rules of ECOWAS, such as they were written starting in 1989, it was Mubarak who was at the head of ECOWAS at the time. It leads to, there were a certain number of principles and rules that came up from this. Mali finds itself in a situation that visibly cannot today, with those in command, cannot for the moment work with these rules, follow these rules. And of course, these countries have pulled away from ECOWAS. I believe that the question relative to MINUSMA also has the same intentions. But here we see all of this vacuum, but we have to look at the overall frame. It's the crisis of multilateralism that we are seeing here. It is a reality. There is a true crisis of multilateralism. Today, these things no longer function. Many countries, whether they're the countries of the Sahel or countries elsewhere, are questioning whether the good that actually can come of these situations. So we have to ask ourselves, what can we do? Why is there not more room, for example, for Africa at the Security Council? Why do they not have a seat there? of course, Africa now is going to be part of the G21. That's an important economic aspect, but on the political and security levels, we have to really observe that what is happening currently is not functioning. And the regional organizations from Africa, whether it is the African Union or others, they are facing the same problems. I suppose you've all heard the speech of the President Musaki, President of the Commission, at the last African Union summit. It leaves no doubt. It's very clear that we are in full crises in Africa. The most thorny questions are treated marginally, and the issues are extremely complex. And I say this why? Because the reasons for the positions taken by the governments of Burkina Faso, of Mali, and of Niger, they have particular situations. They have particular situations. So we're not sure how they will come out of this transition. But there's the difficulty of really addressing all of these questions on a national level. So one question should be that we need to bring in more balance in multilateralism so that the international governments that were coming from other countries, it's important that Mali also be at the heart of this. What happens is that we are now seeing that it is the strong men who are the strongest who have the power. We have violent persons in power. And often these are supported by forces external to the region. This leads to areas where there is a total absence of prosperity and of well-being, such as Ambassador Williams mentioned, we cannot have prosperity in areas that are in war and conflict. Mr. Minister, you've spoken of multilateralism, so I will now turn the floor to General Beaza to see what is happening elsewhere. So, has ECOWAS lost all of its legitimacy? 1/3 of its members are led by military juntas. What could it have done? What could it have done otherwise? Has it lost all credibility and legitimacy? After the coup d'etat against President Bazoum in Niger last year, we heard there were a lot of threats. None of them have been actualized. Thank you. I will first start by responding to your question. As the Vice President of the USIP, Mr. Sani, hello to all. Hello to all. I'm delighted to be a part of this important conversation on the Sahel, the region of West Africa. I am delighted to be here with you. I hope there are also some military here in the audience, but in civilian but dressed as civilians. So, as a military, it's important for the military to be present because they are also part of the people, even if they have particular prerogatives. There are many specialties, nonetheless, within the ranks of the army, the police, the different services. You have all of them carry with them political potentiality, and so it's important to include them in this type of discussion. In terms of the credibility of ECOWAS, you know that all organization is subject to turbulence. Even in the UN there is turbulence. when some people are always asking and clamoring for reforms, changes. There are many problems. I will not discuss them all. You know of many of them. But since 1975, of its founding in 1975, ECOWAS is in continual self-questioning. And it was noted that one needs a strong economy to have prosperity, to have peace and prosperity. You have to have good policy, good politicians, because it's the government that will determine the direction of the country. And having served as I did for 4.5 years with much turbulence, I was fortunate to work hand in hand and with these two ministers when in 2018, and then Ambassador Kamisa, who replaced him, in the same position. Strategically, I was very close to the heads of state. My role in this for 4.5 years was not easy, because one has to be in direct contact with the chief of staffs of all the countries of the region. We included Chad and Mauritania, because the Sahel concerns also these countries that had very specific organizations fighting against terrorism. But the situation really took a downturn, and Minister Coulibaly is correct when he speaks of a crisis of multilateralism. This crisis of multilateralism, I would say, flows from the hypocrisy of the international community. Let us be honest. Let us be serious. Let us look to see the reality in the field. We spoke of MINUSMA. We spoke of the retreat today from Mali, the retreat from Mali, Burkina, Niger, from these organizations. And it is not the first time that countries are pulling away from a community, whether it's a regional community or international community or sectorial community. I do not believe this is the end of it, because the discussions continue. There are underground conversations with heads of state that take into account the situation of our community, and they are reviewing things and questioning things. I did say that for this kind of meeting, it's important to have military present as well. Even as an officer, I'm a defender of human rights, a member of the Commission of Human Rights since 1988. And today I am a member of the Administrative Council of Benin. To say that in the life of a nation, no sector should be marginalized or considered as neutral or silent. Even in Western states and European states, there are coup d'etat. You have to look at the reasons that have contributed to these coup d'etat, and I do hope that with time we will overcome this, and I do have hope for this. Thank you, General, for these comments. And Minister Coulibaly and yourself have mentioned the expected retreat of Mali, Burkina, and Niger from ECOWAS. Does this decision mark a decision of no return, or is really ECOWAS still alive? Is it still kicking? What do you think? I think that all power is temporary, yes? There can be a situation that other governments question. We saw that Mauritania was a good member of ECOWAS, and it also pulled back, and then it asked to be an observer. Yes, but the context was not the same. And then a full-fledged observer, and then Morocco was considering entrance. There were some difficulties, and I believe that it is not the end of the world. It is not the end of the world because, in truth and reality, one needs to see what were the causes of these situations. This is the question to ask. Even children that we raise at home, the education that they receive at home from their families and from the world at large can lead them to have certain behaviors, either controllable or not. Myself, I'm not pessimistic to the point of being it's not reversible, that these decisions are not reversible. We are talking with them personally. I have spoken with most of these persons, but really on a one-on-one level, because these are people who, such as ourselves, sometimes find themselves very isolated, marginalized. You see them, when you talk to them, you can speak to them, but once you have left, if you have spoken to them in a particular way, it is not going to be well received, and you will have had the advantage of working with close to heads of state. You understand the difficulty in doing so.
Monsieur le Ministre,
Can I say a word?
Bien sûr.
May I? There's something that's very clear. Right now, ECOWAS is broken.
Merci de le dire.
Thank you for saying so. We have to say it. ECOWAS is broken. Once again, I'm not trying to attack ECOWAS by saying that. It's just an observation. Policy, especially when it gets to the transnational or supranational level, is an opportunistic position taking, which often commands action. I mean, we know that Mauritania left, right? Which made sense for Mauritania at the time. I mean, and Morocco, there was that issue too. They saw an opportunity. We see a constant there. And in terms of diplomacy, we have what I call constraining constants. Constraining constants are geography, history, culture, the economy, which is always a factor that comes in. And you see this whole variety of factors that come into play, and it means that any given state is not able to take a certain position at any given time sometimes. And whenever that specific context runs up against events, states make decisions that go against what the original fundamental doctrine was at a certain point. You know the attempt at the customs union in our area, that goes back to 1949. 1949, there was the idea for that customs union. The first leader of Mali, which was still called French Sudan, had already talked about with the council to try to build a customs union. So we can see those origins of that project. But at a certain point, when the free trade zone, the African free trade zone, was supposed to move forward, and we started talking about a common currency within ECOWAS and how we could build a consistent economy, when we started to have to make decisions, it started to be a real challenge for the organization. But let's not mistake anything. Withdrawing from ECOWAS, that is those three countries that withdrew, for right now, doesn't really change anything economically. Why? Because there's the West African Economic and Monetary Union, the UEMOA, which covers all of the economic systems and custom systems in particular that ECOWAS has, but then some additional measures in addition. So the economic impact of certain countries leaving ECOWAS, those three countries leaving, I'm not saying it's nothing, but it's not decisive. Now, let's say that after those three countries have decided to leave, that the Economic and Monetary Union Treaty falls apart. That would be a whole other thing. But right now, it's clear that ECOWAS is a broken organization. We can say that based on what we've seen, but also the overall crisis of multilateralism. Let's not ignore that. So we have to think. We have to think about how we can work, including within our own areas, our own spaces. How can we make sure to make it clear that multilateralism is necessary? So that the world can be policed, because if we don't have multilateral principles, once again, it will just be a system of might makes right, and that is unacceptable. That's what leads to nationalism, and as a French politician said, once you have nationalism, that leads to war.
So,
Please.
I mean, this is an important question.
Yeah.
And I agree with what the previous two speakers have already said. But I really do think that the withdrawal from ECOWAS is symptomatic of the same international crisis that we're talking about. But that international crisis has to do with what are the principles now that everybody has decided is deciding upon, and the notion of partnership. I almost dislike that word in this context, even though I used it, because up to now, partnership has really been one way. It's been those who have approaching those who don't have as much, saying, I have something, let's be partners on it. So it was really a one-way street. And I think part of what we're seeing, if there's a legitimacy to some of this disruption that we're seeing in West Africa, in the Sahel specifically, is that there is an effort to create a different kind of balance. And when we look at, if there's no ECOWAS, there's going to have to be an organization that helps to unite and create a common dialogue and common efforts among all those, number one, landlocked countries and all those countries that have so much in common, people, commerce, water dependency, all the rest. So, and I think it's the discussion of what are the objectives, and once we get those objectives, our principles, our charter, how much are we willing to implement them and stand on them? And that is what has caused the crisis, let's say, in the UN, because sometimes we're going to put all our efforts behind supporting a democracy, and sometimes we're not. So, and I think that partnership element, are we really talking with our African colleagues as equal partners? I mean, this is very sensitive. Can a U.S., I'm a former diplomat, but can a U.S. diplomat then come and sit down and talk to Mali, say, as two people who are friends with a long relationship together and really speak to each other as equals, saying, is this really the best route for you? Or, and I think the United States has been kind of hesitant to do that, saying, well, it's an African discussion, we can only let the Africans talk about it among themselves. And so even though we've got this larger charter, this context, we're going to let them ferret it out and be silent. So I think that has to be part of how we go forward in our relations. And I'm not sure that everybody is ready to do that.
Well, let me ask you this. So you were a member of our senior study group for the Sahel, and in our report, we mentioned that the United States needs to work multilaterally in the Sahel. So we don't have anything better than the ECOWAS at this point. What and how should the United States work with the ECOWAS in this new reality?
Well, actually, the U.S. took even when I was in the Foreign Service, we took a rather proactive role in ECOWAS to the extent that we asked for observer status, we wanted to let you know that we were there, and we do consultations. And I believe our government is still doing that. But again, I think that there's this sort of schizophrenia when it comes to real crisis and how much the United States can impose itself, inject itself, and sit down beside our African brothers and sisters and say, look, can't we solve this thing together? And I think there's a little bit of suspicion on the African side saying, well, we've not done much else together in that kind of way, so maybe we don't want you here. I believe that the principles upon which ECOWAS was founded and for a long time worked pretty well. I mean, look what it did in Liberia, look what ECOWAS decided to do in Sierra Leone. Those seem to be okay. Linked to this current dysfunction or broken down period of ECOWAS also has to, is what your local populations and your civil society knows about what is civic responsibility, what are we supposed to expect of our leaders and our governments. And part of the, ECOWAS's threats about coming into Niger were blown out of the sky by Nigerian civil society. They said, wait a minute, we don't want to attack our Nigerian brothers. And so there was a big chasm between what officials were saying and they thought they could do and what people were willing to bear. And I think a big part of the problem, I had discussions with my Nigerian friends during the early part of that crisis. I said, well, what is it that people are willing to fight for? Because in the United States, we say it, and we've gone through it here, we've had struggle, and we continue to have struggle. But this notion of, there are some things we're willing to die for here. And interestingly, for me, an eye-opener was that people said, right now, our confidence in government, our confidence in leadership, our confidence in institutions is such a point like, we're not willing to put anything on the line for any solution. So how can you have an organization that's supposed to be of leadership that are helping to guide when your populations feel so abandoned or disinterested or mistrustful of you? So all those things get put into the mix. Getting back to what the US do, we need to be more present, more active, and have a different relationship of partnership with our counterparts than we have had.
So what does this new partnership look like?
What does it look like? Well, it looks like speaking, it's not that expression of just speaking truth to power, but it means to showing that we are there to help address the priorities that the people of a nation have established, not just the political concerns that are ours, but putting much more in development, putting many more of our own resources, I think, into the Sahel.
Okay.
I've always been a big proponent of Marshall Plans for Africa. I know it's a taboo term, but it's necessary.
Thank you. Monsieur le ministre Coulibaly.
Minister Coulibaly.
Ah oui, oui.
Can I add something?
Pour lui.
For Minister Coulibaly, could I add something for him? Thank you very much. I think we need to see things as they are. And that's a bit my specialty, and especially in military affairs. Just because I commanded some troops, it was a time when 1 or 2 soldiers fell, and 2 or 3 defected from the mission. It wasn't just because that happened didn't mean that I abandoned the mission. It's the same thing for ECOWAS. I think this is turbulence. That happens in every human life, and even in the United Nations. And I'm very happy that we're having this very important discussion here in one of the rooms of the most important institutions and one of the cities that is one of the most powerful centers of the world. We don't need to be so panicked. This means that the greatest power in the world is aware of what is happening. Geopolitically and geostrategically, this great power is bringing real attention to it. The big countries that are monitoring this, they are truly monitoring what's happening. I don't think that ECOWAS is permanently broken apart. I mean, these three countries that are in transition, despite the sudden awakening, the mature awakening of the youth with the new technology that they use, that are taking these countries in the Sahel alliance, that are gaining awareness, that are interested in sovereignty. If those countries are truly in transition, let's let the transition happen. We'll see what happens when there's a new political regime. Maybe they will want to go back to ECOWAS. They might do it. This is a political question. It's a question of political orientation according to what the feeling is when those decisions are made. And I won't hide from you, I was there in the field. I was in the field of combat. I was fighting terrorism, fighting against the issue of IDPs in Burkina Faso. More than 80% of the terrorists are Burkinabe. What does that mean? It means that there's human insecurity. That has gotten so much worse. So what can we do that this land that you all know, that the United States knows very well, these lands that are so rich in minerals, in natural resources, and young people who are so powerful, a population that is growing, that is developing, exponential growth. If the United States really realizes, and of course there's this rivalry with the great powers, but if they can really talk about it, I don't think it's fair to say that ECOWAS is broken. Things are moving.
Voilà le problème avec les francophones, c'est que nous sommes dans de belles expressions, pleines de fleurs. Mais la réalité, mon général, c'est que la CEDEAO a des normes qu'elle a mises en place pour empêcher et punir les coups d'État. On dirait. La CEDEAO n'a rien pu faire contre ces coups d'État.
So the ECOWAS was unable to do anything about the coup d'État. They put in place sanctions. It didn't help. There was this coup d'État in 23 in Niger that shocked everybody. Nothing could be done. It is difficult to say today that no, ECOWAS is not broken. It's difficult to say that. So ECOWAS is not broken, but as you said, let's start with Mali, because it is Mali that opened Pandora's box. So there, I will throw the stones to you two and to all of you in politics and policy. What bothers us in Africa is the elites. Let's be real about it. All the civilians that collaborate with the military that have taken power, they were within the government. When we speak of a third mandate, who votes these laws in the parliaments to change the constitution? These are politicians. And that is the fundamental problem. That's the root of the problem. And I think that is, if we want to speak of human security in our country, if we want to improve human security in our country, I will champion the state if this takes place. In 2012, we had a revolution. In 2015, we voted for socialism. In 1975, 1972, the revolution, 1975, the revolution. And it was a military person who was at the head of that regime. I was perhaps a student at the time, and it was said, no, we cannot continue in the same way. But we were using buses to go to the university, but in '89, when there was the economic decline in Benin, the president, General Caricou, in '89 said, yes, my people are suffering. He was the one who had the political speech towards socialism. He was the one who took us in that direction. Before that speech, and in 1990, Aboul had also a speech on that level, but we did ours earlier. It was a 180-degree change, and we rapidly left socialism to the side, and multilateralism came in. And in 1990, I was there when this took place. And this assembly of the people, we were 350 who elected the prime minister, and we decided that the president, in quote-unquote dictator, what are the lessons for today, General? I was giving you these examples to say that we can have chosen X option today, such as leaving ECOWAS, and other politicians who will take power in the future perhaps will, such as said the minister Koulibaly, they can come back. The countries may ask to return to ECOWAS. So the decisions that were taken by ECOWAS concerning Mali, it was not easy. It was not simple. And I speak in front of witnesses, but what would have allowed civilians to stay in power? It is the same civilians that really impeded this process. And you are witnesses to this. And then the military came. If the civilian politicians had not been so unwilling to change and to have a meeting with between ECOWAS and the president, perhaps there would not have been a coup d'etat. But the person who, the author of this coup d'etat, a military man, was in the field. He was fighting against the terrorists. He was even made hostage by the terrorists. And I will finish by saying, when men amongst you, people amongst you, experience critical situations that concern their personal life, that concern their troops, it is not to justify a coup d'etat. As a military, I would never have entertained a coup d'etat or participated in one. But when there's a great part of the population is faced a certain situation, and when the civilians in power do not handle situations and problems, then sometimes the military feel that, okay, we're going to stop here, and we cannot continue with the situation. So the fault is in the heads of the politicians and the civilians. Yes, and yes, and yes. But if you will allow me to continue, even the United States are not spared from this. Even the United States are not spared. It is very clear, very clear. I am in the capital of the United States. General, please. I would like us to speak of the institution. It is very important. So I have a question for the Minister Koulibaly. You know the state, you know its strengths, its weaknesses, So should the Sahel countries take on strategic reforms of their institutions, and how can the international partners who wish the stability in the Sahel, the U.S. included, how can they assist of these changes, these reforms to be undertaken? Yes. When we speak of the Sahel, we've limited ourselves to Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, because they are in the headlines. But it is much more than that. Sahel, it's from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea. It's that region, encompassed by that whole region. And so the Sahel must also include other countries, Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, Cape Verde. It's the Atlantic, and it's really a space that is extremely vast. So in 2050, which is tomorrow, 2 billion Africans, 2.5 billion Africans will represent 1/4 of the world population, and then a few years later it will be 1/2 of the population, of the world population. And looking at this, the Sahel today, the 5 countries, if we just look at the 5 countries of the G5 Sahel, they will represent 200 million people in 2050. If we look at this entire area of the Sahel, and even we can speak of the Sahara-Sahel region, those states, that space represents no less than 30% of the African population. When you look at the growth predictions, it's between 3 to 5% per year. When you look at the rate of fertility between the very great fertility rate, it's really not even a demographic challenge, it's a demographic time bomb that awaits us. And within this population, the average age, for example, for countries such as Mali and Burkina, is between 16 and 17, the medium age. So if you look at if you know the pyramid of the ages and you just cut it in half, 75% are young people, are youth. So you can imagine the problems that this can set up. So we need partnerships, but to do what? What do we need these partnerships for? What? There is no institution that would be useful if it does not make its principal mission the prosperity of the people. You know, I am a political activist since forever. I was in the student union. I went from being a communist to a liberal. I first became a militant in the communist union of students, and that was part of what I did. And then I became a businessman. I became sort of mainstreamed. But I can say that there is no institution that should exist or can exist if it is not turned towards the prosperity, and a particularly shared prosperity. And it's the same with partnerships. If a partnership is not geared towards prosperity for all, it should not exist. So future institutions of Sahelian states and everywhere in Africa, they should really highlight one element that I feel is the most important, and that is education. Education. The new technological sciences have a characteristic, a feature. They are factors that equalize everyone in society. So thanks to social media and thanks to AI and the digital world, microchips, the youth of Africa can immediately come up to par with the West. But this is only possible if we have already trained the young people. Secondly, is agriculture. The second domain is agriculture. Once again, we must leave these post-colonial agricultural institutions because people work hard, but all the raw materials are exported. We export gold, the cotton that's going to make the Levi's in a foreign country that I will buy later in Africa. So that's a problem. All of our raw materials are exported. We are only exporting our raw materials. We are very little, we are not involved enough in the fabrication, in manufacturing ourselves. So we need to work towards the industrialization of Africa. We need institutions for the future so that those in charge in Africa, they must fight for this. They must. They must make education a priority, especially in new technologies, even for little girls, and also modern agriculture. Of course, there will be an effect. Those who are living in rural areas, there will be new technologies and artificial intelligence that will provoke a certain level of urbanism. I think that in 2050, 60% of Africans will be living in urban areas, and oftentimes in poverty. And so there will be delinquency and gangs and all sorts of problems. So there won't just be terrorism. There are phenomena of insecurity that linked to urban problems that have not been properly controlled or dealt with. So these decisions
le Mali, le Niger, le Burkina prennent des décisions
which are coming in, which are taking decisions that will not, in my opinion, serve the economic interests of the region. We have to open up. Whatever the problem may be, whatever decisions made by the president may be, in our African tradition, we need to agree to talk and not insult each other. So for me, it's important. We cannot close ourselves off. These are really important. We can't let go of that. And then the United States, the greatest military power, the greatest economic power in the world, even the greatest scientific power ultimately, all of those, the bosses, they now need to start thinking, step back and start thinking about changing the paradigm. You know, it's nothing new to say, I think. I think it's true for the United States, it's true for other great powers. Africa needs to be looked at differently. If only because global security and collective defense requires it. Africa needs to be looked at differently. And I really want to insist on this crisis of multilateralism, which is digging into this region with a kind of the rule of the biggest and the mightiest. So let's look at differently at questions of debt, for example, because that is often the only way to get Africans out of this economic breakdown. But we need to take a new look at the loans that are made to develop the African continent. We can't continue on with the current interest rates and with the periods, the current loan periods. The dates of these Sahel countries, we need to be giving 20 to 25 years on current debt. I'm not even talking about future debt. I mean, a lot of analysts are saying that 2024 will be the default year, the payment default year for a lot of countries. So urgently, and the US can do this, the bosses can do this, they can do it. They can take that decision to lengthen the repayment period. And you have compatriots, Jeffrey Sachs, who have been thinking about that topic. He's quite interesting. Maybe it could be interesting to look at what he's been doing recently. I don't agree with him on everything, but I think he's working on some interesting things. We should revisit the payment period for current debt, and then for future debt, we need to create a whole new paradigm for that. The current framing of the Bretton Woods does not work. It will not work. It cannot work. And I'll conclude on that point. I want to remind you that in the 80s, there was the structural adjustment plan. And that structural adjustment plan destroyed the education sector in the Sahel. The education sector. All of a sudden, just taking the example of Mali, we had schools that had to divide students into two categories. They had morning school and then the afternoon school because there were not enough teachers. The state had to get rid of teachers because this structural adjustment plan imposed a reduction of payroll, of school payroll. Can you imagine, in this post-colonial stage, a state that was just starting out following the trauma of colonization after the great conflict of the War of Independence? 20 years on, it did not help us reconstruct our nation. And we had these incidents that condemned an entire generation of young Africans. Don't be surprised that a decade later you are seeing the problems that we saw in the 1990s. The speech, of course, it was a specific incident, but I remember I was young. In 1980, 1981, there was the student strike in Mali, which was so violent. And the clandestine political organizations that fought against power, Moussa Traoré at the time, but that was a symptom of things that had started so much earlier. The French will have their own point of view on what happened then, but there were other things that happened before. And this policy of structural adjustment condemned, and I'm saying it again, condemned an entire generation of Africans. Not just teachers, but more so students. Students, our education system did not provide quality education for more than 30 years. And now we see the outcome. These are young people who are vulnerable to radicalization, who are often exposed to speech, to discourse that doesn't necessarily come from Africa, but for 40 years we were seeing France bringing a certain discourse to the table, but we're seeing young people who never had the solid cultural grounding to be able to face those policies of influence. They were not able to resist, and so education is what counts. I absolutely agree. To support an economic system that is built on a whole new paradigm, I really insist on that. Scientific education for young Sahelian girls, it's so important. Thank you, Minister. I wish that we had more time to ask questions about peace, security, and so on in Sahel, but I'm looking at the clock, and I think maybe we should move on to the
questions and answers now. Who wants to go first? So please, some rules here. State your name, institution, and a sentence with a question mark at the end.
Should I go in French or English?
Comme vous voulez.
As you want.
Okay, so I think I wrote everything in French because. Sorry about that, but bonsoir et bonjour.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning. Thank you for your remarks. My name is Mr. Moucharou. I'm a doctoral student at Howard University. I am doing African studies. The minister said a lot of things that were very interesting. And in your conclusion in particular, when you spoke about the model of institutions that needs to change its center of interest, needs to focus on prosperity, I think I was a bit confused by the fact that for me it seemed like the development models that are currently being used in Africa are models that are mostly taking into account the Western reality. And when we talk about security with these new countries, that are we taking into account the sensitivities of the population? These are the issues, are the models we use directly linked to the population? Do you think that these people or these new leaders, the new leaders in these countries have seized on something, have grasped something that has permitted a certain awakening, regardless of what the ultimate political orientations might be? You also spoke about education. So what type of education do you think is best for Africa? Because also these days, this education is based on post-colonial models, which often turn Africans into parrots who just repeat what they've been told. And so I think that's an important question to be thinking about. But I agree with you on that point. Maybe you could just expand on it. That was 2 questions. Those were for me, right? Yeah, for the minister, for the general. Yes. So I talk about prosperity, and maybe it's surprising coming from a foreign minister of defense to be talking about we need a more economic solution rather than a military solution, because I think we've over-militarized various issues. You know, every time we opt for solely military solutions, we become increasingly dependent on our military in terms of GDP, and so there's fallout for the health sector, the education sector, and so on. So these days we need to rethink, because we're here to talk about peace and security. For those issues, we still need to have less military solutions, even though sometimes they are important for fighting terrorism, for example. But we need to prioritize crisis resolution measures that give more resources to economic solutions, cultural integration solutions, etc. And yes, of course, we've been told that in 1492 Columbus discovered America. Come on, that's not true. Abu Bakr went out and discovered things before him, and okay, he discovered Indians, he discovered people who were already there, but that's what we were told at the time. Christopher Columbus discovered America. We learned that Marco Polo was a great champion. No. So anyway, I mean, I can go on with different examples like that. You know what we say? The day that animals learn to write, a lot of hunters will feel ashamed. People used to say va evictis, shame on the conquerors. Colonization, slavery, these are the results of military defeat. Well, with slavery there were other sort of complicit actors, but when we see the results of these military defeats, because one party was stronger than another, what happens next? After that, you have to reinvent. You have to reinvent yourself. It's important. It's important no matter who we are, wherever we come from. When something like that happens, we have to reestablish a certain historical truth, right? Other great intellectuals have done it. Sonika, there are others. I don't know if you've read Roots. You should read it. Very interesting. That corpus is there. That helps us revisit the principles of education for our youth. Because, and I digress psychologically, maybe it's a cheap digression, but we have to learn to hold ourselves in greater esteem. This is extremely important. We're here in Washington. Our ancestors contributed to Washington, D.C. Just now, when we arrived, we saw, we went to the Lincoln Memorial. There was a famous speech that was given here.
I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history.
as the biggest demonstration of civil rights of our history. Voilà. Donc, on a de quoi être fier. Mais
so we can be proud of these things, but I'm not one of those people who wants revenge. No. I want a happy, joyful, hardworking, and prosperous Africa. I don't want an Africa who's always at war. Even though we have to assert ourselves at the table, we have to say to the US government what we want and what we do not want. We have to say to the EU what we want and what we do not want. We must do that. But ultimately, if we decide to agree on certain decisions that have been made for us elsewhere, then we can't complain later. Thank you, Minister. Question?
Excellent.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Madame Péchon. I'm from Cameroon. I have benefited from a fellowship at Cameroonian University. I would like to ask you a simple question, because it seems like you're saying that ECOWAS is not broken, that it is not having problems. So I want to reframe the question. So what does ECOWAS plan to do? Because you know that as an Africans, we believe in ECOWAS, which is a strong example of the protection of human rights and democracy in Africa. Well, okay, so if ECOWAS is not broken, then it follows, and this is kind of my question, it follows, what can we expect from ECOWAS? There have been recommendations, there were threats that were then mitigated. What can we expect from ECOWAS? What can we expect from ECOWAS?
It is fortunate that what we are experiencing this morning, because there's a great thinker, Albert Einstein. I think there is a street named after him here in the American capital. He said, "It is not those who do harm of whom we should be afraid. It is those who see bad things evil being done and do nothing to stop it." We have alluded, perhaps voluntarily or involuntarily, the causes of the instability of the region, which is terrorism. This terrorism rooted itself, anchored itself in the poverty of the populations, in the precarity of the people, in the total absence of security, human security. And when I speak of human security, I join the minister in speaking of education, health, in the domains of economic markets, of farming, and of also, we have seen that these terrorists come to the populations and say, in 48 hours we will be there. They come, they take their herds, they destroy their culture, their crops. And when did this start? So the first institution that came in 2012 was ECOWAS. It's very important, what we must not forget, but we do forget too quickly. Earlier I said it's very good that this conversation take place in the U.S. Capitol. It is a good sign. It is an important sign that terrorists and with those who support them, imagine 5,000 motorcycles, 10,000 motorcycles that show up in a very arid area and allow the terrorists to take action.
Yeah.
But it is not this that will allow the ECOWAS to intervene. No, I'm just looking at the sources of instability. So ECOWAS intervened, and then afterwards the president, Bika, solicited assistance from France, from which the Operation Serval, President Djoukunda Akoli, he was the transitionary president, yes. And IBK, therefore, saw the French arrive to fight terrorism, and Operation Serval stopped the progression of terrorism very clearly, quickly. The general who was in charge of this mission was a personal friend, and after that, there was Bakan. There was MINUSMA. MINUSMA was the intervention of the international community, but terrorism continued to evolve on the ground. So the fundamental question we must ask, MINUSMA had 13,000 men, 13,000 troops sent by 110 countries from the entire world, including the US, the first air power of the world, and also Russia and China, Turkey. If you want to give a name, all of these countries were part of MINUSMA, and billions were spent to fight terrorists who were perhaps less than 10,000, and we were unable to defeat them because of politics, because of governance, because of the social and economic policies of these governments, the Sahel, the Mali, and so forth. The ECOWAS took important decisions while I was there as a Commissioner of Political Affairs. And these decisions allowed the transitionary governments to reflect. But as you know, in every institution, it can be a problem of leadership at a given time. I can tell you that the leadership of ECOWAS at a certain time was weak. And the vision played a role downstream by the heads of state that participated in this weakened vision. And as we said, there is a... Do you agree? Do you agree that other... I can't read. Today, there are today issues with the heads of state. There are sanctions that are included in the protocols of foreign affairs. At that time, while we were in the midst of all of this activity, we never impeded the foreign ministers to move, to make decisions. And the last decisions taken in terms of Niger, I think that the decision of sending troops to Niger from ECOWAS were taken, it was an emotional response. It was a sort of emotional response from the heads of state, because each one of them asked them, what next? So there were three things that the politicians may or may not agree with. The first being the conquest of power. Secondly, is you have to achieve power, then you have to know how to manage it. So first you reach power, then you have to manage it, then you have to know how to conserve that power. And this is true in the entire world. These three things are true even here in the United States. When the Republican Party is in power, it does not want to leave. When the Conservatives are in power, they do not want to leave. By all means, it's necessary. They want to stay in power. So the reality that we are living currently in West Africa and the Sahel, and in terms of the decisions of things that have not come to a good conclusion, there's also the intervention of the media coming often from, and the intervention from the big powers. So any news coming out of Washington today is heard throughout the world immediately. So the whole problem stemmed from the lack of human security. So really the main conclusion of our discussion is that we must work towards the development of human security, to assure human security. ECOWAS put in place a plan to fight terrorism, an action plan to fight terrorism, and it is myself who brought together all of the chiefs of staffs of all the, including from Chad and from Mauritania. We put together an action plan with 8 pillars: education, health, the development of infrastructure, border surveillance, coordination, for a budget of $2,300,000,000. And we received not a cent, not a penny. In 2020, from 2020 to 2024, I am the one who worked on this, who put this plan together. I have it here with me, if you allow, Madam Ambassador. Here is the plan. Here is the action plan. It is in English and in French. But when the war in Ukraine surfaced, it was a geopolitical issue. The 44 billion quickly went to Ukraine, whereas we said we only need $2.3 billion to put an end to terrorism. So there won't be coup d'etat, so democracy can be developed, so human security can be guaranteed. And this is why I say that what is happening today is extremely important, and I thank you all to have brought together this meeting. Thank you. 30 seconds. When I say, I don't say that the motor is broken. I say it's stalled. And so it needs to be repaired. I want to be very, very clear on that. It is stalled, but it is not broken. It's in disrepair. Thank you. ECOWAS. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Fellow with a member of Congress, specifically Congresswoman Sheila Surplus McCormick. She is on the House of Foreign Affairs Committee, and specifically the subcommittee on Africa, and so she's closely following this whole situation in the region and what's going on with ECOWAS. And so what we wanted to know specifically is, what you all think. I know the Marshall Plan was mentioned, as well as, changing the time frame for the loans, the repayment of loans. But we wanted to know, I guess, aside from that, what you think, if there's anything that specifically Congress can do, or what you would like us to do in order to basically help the democratic crisis that's occurring in the region.
Thank you. I love the question. Ambassador Williams.
So don't tell the Congresswoman Marshall Plan, because she'll throw out the piece of paper. But what I do think is really important, I believe there has to be much more economic investment. And so there are structures that could use. MCC is an example of something the United States government is trying to do to encourage infrastructure investment. But there's some problems with MCC in that, you can call them conditionalities, some of which, of course, are our principles. But we need to rethink that. And to the extent that we can connect these countries that need electricity, that need road work, that need investment in their educational systems, I think those are the kinds of programs that our Congress can look at and put a higher priority on. And we haven't. We haven't created an incentive program that makes it easier for American companies that want to do work in the Sahel, and even for the university partnerships and collaboration on the medical front. There are ways where we can build infrastructure support that's going to help towards this human security that was just alluded to. So, refashioning a specific MCC/Sahel type program, I think would be something that would be very important to look at. The notion of getting civil society engagement and the idea of populations not having confidence in their elite, the elite equals the political class very often. And so there does have to be a different kind of engagement that Congress should have with other kinds of, with a middle class that's not a political class. But at the same time, I think if Congress had a little bit more engagement with the various national assemblies in these countries, I think that also is very important. Very often they send staffers, but you don't see a lot of cross-communication. Some of these, when I was ambassador in Niger, sometimes they said, we don't know how to draft certain kinds of legislation. How would you frame such a thing? And I think the kinds of exchanges on that level, how do we set up an environmental protection regime, for example? How do you really set up a regime that's going to be looking at corruption and graft in within the state? I think those kinds of things are, if our Congress were to demonstrate that kind of interest in their counterparts and in what's going on there, I think that would get a lot of people's attention, and that would show the public, civil society, that the United States still cares, because we're beginning to lose that glow too, that battle.
Thank you. And in our CSI group report, there are specific recommendations for Congress. Please take a copy. Dernière question. Et nous concluons.
Hello to all. I'm ambassador of Mali, the chef of mission, actually, I was. It's an honor to see my two, Madame Lys, two of my prior supervisors. We worked on missions together for the elections of Côte d'Ivoire in 2020. So thank you for these exchanges. Before continuing, I would like to make a suggestion. Would it be useful, should this happen again, to have officials from these countries concerned by this question, perhaps having them present also? That would better enable to open this discussion. I would like to also come back to a few comments that were made.
Especially comments about the involvement of ECOWAS in anti-terrorism. I think we have to note that ECOWAS started to deploy in December 2012, and it changed status to have MISMA in 2013. And this was not a political mission, it was a peace initiative for MINUSMA, but that exacerbated the issues in the region for the population, and we saw what happened. So that was for MINUSMA. But in terms of the three countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, what's important is to know that we shouldn't be limited to statements or to be talking about leaving ECOWAS, but we have to look at these three big issues: collective defense, diplomacy, amongst others. So these states are not closed off. They are open to others on these bigger collaborative issues. So we have to be thinking about partnerships, but still respecting the sovereignty of states. And I think that's an important point, because to go back to the comment, do you have a question? Yes, but this is just the comment part. To go back to Ambassador Williams, we need conversation. We can't have a situation where the US, for example, sees our countries as pariahs. No, they need to improve communication and conversation. I'll stop there. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to conclude this discussion, which I'm sure will continue in the hallway. I would like to thank Ambassador Williams. Thank you, Minister Koulibaly. It was an honor to have you with us. And General Bianzon, thank you for your travel to come here.